betrayal happened again. Miranda stole my research just as she had in my previous life, her academic theft reborn in this second chance I'd been mysteriously granted. I stood frozen in the university lab, watching her hunched over my notebook that I'd deliberately left open on the bench. The familiar scent of formaldehyde and cleaning solution permeated the air as my fingers clutched the doorframe, my knuckles turning white. 5 years in the past, yet nothing had changed. "Oh, I didn't realize you were still here," Miranda exclaimed, straightening up with practiced innocence. Her pen, my distinctive blue gel pen, still hovered over her own notebook where she'd been frantically scribbling my original equations. "Just forgot my phone," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. My heart hammered against my ribs as memories from my first life crashed over me. Last time, I'd trusted her. Last time, I'd believed her excuses about similar research directions and coincidental methodologies. Last time, I'd watched helplessly as she built her celebrated career on my stolen work while my reputation disintegrated under accusations of trying to plagiarize her. Not this time. I strode across the lab, the rubber soles of my shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor, and casually gathered my belongings. Miranda's jasmine perfume, the same scent that had surrounded her at that devastating conference where she'd presented my life's work as her own, threatened to choke me. "Working late?" I asked, feigning ignorance of her deception. "Just some inspiration that struck me," she replied, flashing that brilliant smile that had convinced our department head of her innocence in my previous life. "You know how it is with quantum entanglement theory. When the idea comes, you have to capture it. My idea, my theory, my life's work. Again." I nodded and escaped before the rage bubbling inside me could erupt. Outside in the cool night air, I finally allowed myself to tremble, leaning against the brick wall of the science building. 5 years ago, or 5 years in the future, depending on how you looked at this bizarre second chance, I'd lost everything when Miranda stole my groundbreaking thesis on quantum entanglement applications. But now, knowing her methods, knowing her timeline, I had the perfect opportunity to ensure history wouldn't repeat itself. I clutched my true research journal tighter against my chest, the real one I'd started keeping hidden the moment I woke up in my 24-year-old body with all my 30-year-old memories intact. The cool leather cover grounded me as I took deep breaths of the crisp autumn air. "This time," I whispered to the stars above the campus, "I'm ready for you." 3 months later, I watched Miranda confidently present her findings to Professor Whitaker, our shared advisor. The projector hummed in the background as she gestured to a slide, showing exactly the flawed methodology I'd planted in my decoy notebook 2 weeks earlier. "As you can see, Professor, the quantum field dispersion follows this pattern," she said, pointing to the deliberately erroneous equation I'd crafted. "I believe this approach could revolutionize quantum computing when fully developed." The metallic taste of vindication filled my mouth as I maintained a neutral expression. Professor Whitaker nodded appreciatively, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the projection screen. "Impressive work, Miranda," he said, stroking his beard. "Very original thinking." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. When my turn came to present my progress, I showed a completely different approach, one that deliberately appeared less developed, more conventional. Professor Whitaker's interest visibly waned. "Solid work, but perhaps a bit traditional in your approach," he commented. The faint scent of his pipe tobacco clung to his tweed jacket as he shifted in his seat. "You might benefit from thinking more innovatively, like Miranda." Miranda shot me a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. I remembered that smile, the same one she'd given me after accepting the Breakthrough Physics Award for my stolen work. "I'll try, Professor," I replied meekly, while inwardly calculating the next phase of my plan. The following week, Professor Whitaker reassigned our lab schedules. Unsurprisingly, Miranda received prime hours with the advanced equipment, while I was relegated to early mornings and weekends. "You understand," he explained when I questioned the change, "we need to prioritize the most promising research directions." I nodded, feigning disappointment while secretly relieved. This schedule gave me exactly what I needed, time alone in the lab when no one would witness my real work. That evening in my tiny apartment, I completed my application for the Hammond Foundation's Independent Researcher Grant, a small private funding opportunity I discovered only after my career collapsed in my first life. The scent of instant ramen and strong coffee filled the studio as I worked late into the night, finalizing my proposal. 3 weeks later, I received the email I'd been waiting for. The Hammond Foundation had approved my grant, $25,000 of unrestricted research funds that would allow me to establish my own small lab space off campus. I pressed my palm against my mouth to stifle a victorious laugh, feeling the rough texture of the callus on my thumb against my lips. My phone buzzed with a text from Miranda. "Study group tomorrow? I'm having trouble with Koshland's quantum interpretation theorem." I knew exactly why. The flawed methodology I'd planted had led her into a theoretical dead end that only became apparent when applied to Koshland's work. "Sure," I texted back, happy to help. The next day, I carefully explained just enough to help her paper over the theoretical cracks without resolving the fundamental flaws. She scribbled notes frantically, the scratch of her pen against paper punctuating the quiet library air. "You're amazing," she gushed when we finished. "I don't know why you're not making more progress with your own research, though." I shrugged, playing my role perfectly. "Just taking my time, making sure I understand the fundamentals." "Well, I've been meaning to tell you, I'm presenting at the department conference next month. Professor Whitaker thinks my approach could be groundbreaking." "That's fantastic," I replied, my voice steady despite the fury roiling inside me. "Congratulations." As she gathered her things, the sleeve of her cashmere sweater brushed against my hand. Soft. Expensive. Just like the designer clothes she'd bought with her fellowship money in my first life. Clothes purchased with opportunities stolen from me. "See you in lab tomorrow," she called over her shoulder, her high heels clicking against the library's marble floor as she left. I sat alone at the table, a quiet smile forming on my lips. Next month, Miranda would present her stolen research, complete with the fatal theoretical flaw I'd embedded within it. And that would be just the beginning of her downfall. The conference room buzzed with ambient conversation as Miranda approached the podium. I sat in the back row, watching faculty members and graduate students settle into their seats, completely unaware of the academic train wreck they were about to witness. Miranda wore her presentation outfit, the sleek navy blazer and pencil skirt she reserved for important occasions. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked every bit the rising star of the physics department. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her confident voice carrying through the room. "Today, I'm excited to share my breakthrough in quantum entanglement theory and its applications for quantum computing. My breakthrough. My theory, but not my mistake." I watched Professor Whitaker in the front row, nodding encouragingly as Miranda clicked to her first slide. The projector hummed, casting a blue glow over her face as she began explaining her methodology. My methodology with my deliberately planted flaw. As she progressed through the presentation, I noticed the moment the more experienced faculty members began to detect something amiss. Professor Chen frowned slightly, his bushy eyebrows drawing together. Dr. Kapoor tilted her head, her expression puzzled. The fatal theoretical inconsistency was becoming apparent to those who truly understood quantum mechanics at a deep level. When Miranda reached her conclusion and asked for questions, there was a moment of uncomfortable silence. Then, Professor Chen raised his hand. "I'm afraid I don't understand how you reconcile your field dispersion equation with Koshland's third postulate," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "They seem fundamentally at odds." Miranda faltered for the first time, her confident smile wavering. "Well, I believe my approach actually extends Koshland's work rather than contradicting it." "But your equation on slide 17, Dr. Kapoor interjected, her silver bangles jingling as she pointed, "directly violates the conservation principle Koshland established. This would invalidate your entire framework." The room grew warmer as more questions followed, each exposing another aspect of the theoretical flaw I'd embedded in my decoy research. Miranda's cheeks flushed as she struggled to defend the indefensible, her responses growing increasingly flustered. I felt a momentary pang of sympathy, remembering my own public humiliation when my legitimate criticism of her stolen work had been dismissed as jealousy in my previous life. The memory hardened my resolve. As the session ended, Miranda rushed from the podium, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The cool air conditioning raised goosebumps on my arms as I watched her retreat, her shoulders hunched in defeat. Professor Whitaker approached me as the room emptied. "Perhaps it's fortunate you're taking a more measured approach with your research," he said, the smell of pipe tobacco surrounding us. "Miranda's work seemed promising, but clearly there are significant issues to resolve." I nodded solemnly. Quantum theory can be treacherous that way. One small miscalculation can undermine everything. That evening, I received a frantic call from Miranda. "I don't understand what went wrong," she sobbed into the phone. "Everyone thinks I'm an idiot now. Professor Whitaker suggested I completely reconsider my approach." "I'm sure it's just a minor setback," I consoled her, the lie bitter on my tongue. "Would you like me to look over your work?" "Would you? You're the only one who might understand what I'm trying to do." "Because it was my work, my approach, my theory, with my deliberate sabotage." "Of course," I replied. That's what friends are for." After hanging up, I opened my laptop and continued working on my actual research in my secure private folder. With my Hammond Foundation funding, I'd established a small but effective lab space in a business incubator 15 minutes from campus. There, twice a week, I conducted the real experiments that were steadily building toward the comprehensive quantum entanglement theory that would eventually vindicate me. The gentle rain tapping against my window provided a soothing backdrop as I worked late into the night, advancing the research that Miranda believed she was stealing. Research that would eventually destroy her stolen career while establishing my legitimate one. 6 months later, Miranda had recovered from her conference debacle by adopting a new approach, one she'd gleaned from glimpses of my actual work that I'd strategically allowed her to spy. I'd been careful this time, revealing only portions of my methodology without the underlying theoretical framework that made it revolutionary. We were in the final year of our PhD program now, and the pressure to produce significant results intensified daily. The stakes were even higher this time around. Prestigious postdoc positions, potential faculty appointments, and industry offers all hinged on our thesis work. I entered the lab early one Saturday morning and immediately sensed something was wrong. The familiar scent of cleaning solution was tainted with the lingering trace of Miranda's jasmine perfume, though she was never scheduled for Saturday sessions. My heart raced as I checked my experimental setup. Everything appeared untouched, but when I accessed the lab computer, I discovered recent activity during the midnight hours. Someone had downloaded my latest data files. I closed my eyes, a wave of déjà vu washing over me. This was exactly how it had started last time. Miranda accessing my research when she thought no one would know. But this time, I was prepared. The data she had stolen was another elaborate fake, compelling on the surface but containing subtle inconsistencies that would only become apparent when attempting to build a comprehensive theory around it. Meanwhile, my real research was securely stored on encrypted drives at my private lab. What Miranda didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had a unique advantage in solving the quantum entanglement problem that went beyond my memories from my previous life. 2 weeks later, I visited Professor Whitaker during his office hours. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through his window, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air of his book-filled office. "I wanted to discuss my thesis direction," I began, settling into the creaky leather chair across from his desk. "Of course," he replied, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Though I must say, I've been concerned about your progress. Miranda has made remarkable strides since her setback at the conference." I nodded, feigning nervousness. "Actually, that's what I wanted to discuss. I've been pursuing a different approach in private, and I think it's time I shared it with you." "Oh?" His interest was barely piqued. I took a deep breath, feeling the smooth texture of the folder I carried as I opened it on his desk. "What I'm about to show you is confidential, but I believe it provides context for my research direction." I slid across a photograph in several old academic papers. My uncle was Dr. Jonathan Weber. Professor Whitaker's eyes widened as he picked up the photograph showing me as a child, next to the famous theoretical physicist whose promising career had been cut short by his early death. "Jonathan Weber was your uncle? Why haven't you ever mentioned this?" "His work was controversial toward the end," I explained. "I didn't want any special treatment or preconceptions about my own research." The truth was, in my first life, I hadn't made this connection until after my career was destroyed, when I'd found my late uncle's private research notes among my mother's belongings. notes that contained theoretical insights decades ahead of their time, insights that had helped me understand where quantum entanglement theory needed to go. He was working on a unified approach to quantum field theory before he died, I continued. I've been building on some of his unpublished ideas, testing them alongside my official research. Professor Whitaker reverently examined my uncle's papers, the familiar academic hunger evident in his eyes. This is remarkable. These equations predated Koshland's work by nearly a decade, but anticipate many of his conclusions. And extend beyond them, I added quietly, which is where my thesis is heading. The meeting lasted 2 hours as I carefully revealed enough of my true research direction to secure Professor Whitaker's renewed interest without exposing the full extent of my work. By the time I left his office, the sun had set and my advisor's perception of me had fundamentally shifted. "I'd like weekly updates on this approach," he said as I gathered my materials. "This could be extraordinarily significant." I nodded, suppressing my triumphant smile. "Thank you for your confidence, Professor." As I walked across the darkened campus, the cool evening breeze carried the scent of blooming cherry trees. For the first time since my rebirth, I allowed myself to feel genuine hope. The first domino had fallen. Miranda was waiting outside my apartment building, pacing anxiously on the sidewalk. When she saw me, she rushed forward, her face pale with worry. "Where have you been? I've been calling you for hours." I patted my pocket. "Sorry, left my phone at home." "What's wrong?" "Professor Whitaker wants to meet with both of us tomorrow morning. He wouldn't say why." I frowned, feigning confusion while my pulse quickened with anticipation. "That's odd. I just had a meeting with him." "About what?" Her voice sharpened with sudden suspicion. "My thesis direction," I replied casually. I showed him some new approaches I've been considering. Miranda stared at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You've been different lately. More secretive." "Have I?" I tilted my head innocently. "I've just been focused. The final year is stressful for everyone." She nodded slowly, but the seed of doubt had been planted. "Well, whatever it is, we'll find out tomorrow, 9 o'clock. After she left, I leaned against my apartment door, allowing myself a moment of satisfaction before preparing for the confrontation to come. The chessboard was set, and tomorrow would advance the game significantly. Professor Whitaker's office felt smaller with 3 people in it. Miranda perched on the edge of her chair, her knuckles white as she gripped her leather portfolio. I sat more comfortably, having anticipated this meeting since my revelation yesterday. "I've asked you both here because I've made an important decision," Professor Whitaker began, his fingers steepled under his chin. The morning light caught the silver in his beard as he looked between us. "The department has received special funding for one advanced research position with access to the new quantum computing lab at Quantum Tech." Miranda straightened, her interest visibly piqued. Quantum Tech was the leading private research facility in our field, and access to their resources would be invaluable. "Originally, I had intended to recommend Miranda for this position," he continued. I felt her triumphant glance in my direction. "However, recent developments have caused me to reconsider." Professor Whitaker turned to me. "After reviewing your uncle's theoretical framework and your extensions of his work, I believe your research direction shows more revolutionary potential." The silence that followed was deafening. Miranda's jaw literally dropped, her face flushing crimson. "With all due respect, Professor," she finally managed, her voice tight, "I've consistently produced more substantial results throughout our program. One meeting shouldn't outweigh years of productivity." "It's not just one meeting, Miss Cartwright," Professor Whitaker replied calmly. "I've been growing concerned about certain theoretical inconsistencies in your recent work. Furthermore, there are notable similarities between your earlier approaches and some preliminary work in Dr. Weber's papers that Miss Sullivan shared with me yesterday." The implication hung in the air like a thundercloud. Miranda's perfume suddenly seemed cloying in the small space as she struggled to respond. "Similarities in quantum theory research aren't unusual," she finally said, her voice unnaturally high. "The field naturally channels researchers towards similar conclusions." "Perhaps," Professor Whitaker conceded. "But I've decided that Miss Sullivan will receive my recommendation for the Quantum Tech position. That will be all, Miss Cartwright." Miranda stood so abruptly that her chair teetered, nearly toppling backward. Without another word, she stormed from the office, slamming the door behind her. Professor Whitaker sighed heavily, removing his glasses to rub his eyes. That was unpleasant, but necessary. Your uncle's framework provides a compelling alternative to the approaches currently dominating the field. Thank you for your confidence in me, I replied, maintaining my composure despite the exhilaration coursing through me. I won't let you down. As I left his office, the familiar hallway of the physics building seemed somehow brighter. Students passed by, their conversations creating a gentle background hum that felt strangely comforting. I had just reached the building's exit when a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me into an empty classroom. Miranda slammed the door behind us, her face contorted with rage. "What did you do?" she hissed, backing me against the wall. The smell of chalk dust filled my nostrils as I maintained my calm. "I shared my research with our advisor," I replied evenly. "That's all." "Bullshit," she spat. "You showed him something about your uncle, the great Dr. Weber? You've never mentioned any connection before." I slipped my hand into my pocket, activating the voice recorder app on my phone, a precaution I'd prepared for just such a confrontation. "I didn't see how it was relevant until recently," I explained. "My approach builds on some of his theoretical work." "You deliberately undermined me," she accused, stepping closer. "After everything I've done for you." I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. "Everything you've done for me? Like what exactly? Taking credit for my ideas? Copying my methodology?" Her eyes widened fractionally before narrowing again. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you? The equations in your notebook, identical to mine. Your sudden breakthroughs that always seem to follow my lab sessions. The mysterious download of my data files last Saturday night when you weren't scheduled to be in the lab." Miranda's face paled slightly before she recovered. "You're delusional. You're just jealous because I've always been more successful." "With my work," I finished for her. "But not anymore." She stepped back, smoothing her blouse as if physically composing herself. "This isn't over. You have no proof of anything, and one recommendation doesn't guarantee you that position." "We'll see," I replied calmly, though my heart hammered against my ribs. As she stalked from the room, I leaned against the cool surface of the desk, allowing myself to tremble with the aftermath of adrenaline. This confrontation had never happened in my previous life because I'd never caught on to her deception until it was too late. For the first time, I felt a flicker of genuine sympathy for Miranda. She truly didn't understand the depth of the trap she'd walked into. A trap 5 years in the making, crafted by someone with knowledge of her every move before she made it. That evening, I worked late in my private lab, running the critical experiment that would cement my theoretical framework. The equipment hummed softly as I calibrated the delicate quantum sensors, their soft blue light illuminating my face in the otherwise dim room. My phone buzzed with a text from Professor Whitaker. "Miranda submitted her thesis proposal today. Remarkably similar to the direction you outlined yesterday, though less developed. We should discuss." I smiled grimly at the screen. "Right on schedule. The annual department symposium was the most significant event in our academic calendar. A showcase where final-year PhD candidates presented their thesis work before faculty, industry representatives, and visiting academics. In my previous life, this event had marked the beginning of my downfall when Miranda presented my stolen research to universal acclaim. This time would be different. The symposium was held in the university's grand hall, with its imposing oak panels and stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the audience. The scent of coffee and pastries from the refreshment table mingled with the woody polish of the ancient podium as speakers took their turns presenting. I sat in the front row, dressed in a crisp blazer and pencil skirt, my hair pulled back in a professional bun. Beside me sat Dr. Eleanor Hammond, founder of the Hammond Foundation and now my mentor, who had specially arranged to attend today. Behind us were the editors of Quantum Physics Review, the field's most prestigious journal, invited at my request through Dr. Hammond's connections. Miranda was scheduled as the penultimate speaker, a prime slot that reflected Professor Whitaker's lingering regard for her work despite his recent concerns. She looked immaculate in an expensive emerald dress, her confidence apparently unshaken by our recent confrontations. As she took the podium, a hush fell over the audience. This was her moment, the culmination of years of work, both hers and, unknowingly to most, mine. Distinguished faculty, honored guests, fellow researchers, she began, her voice steady and authoritative. Today I present my thesis work on revolutionizing quantum computing through entangled field manipulation. The familiar words washed over me, phrases and concepts I had developed, now polished and presented with Miranda's characteristic flair. But this time, I noted with grim satisfaction, she had incorporated elements from the flawed data I had allowed her to steal from the lab computer. Her presentation was masterful, I had to admit. Slides transitioned seamlessly, complex concepts rendered accessible through her clear explanations. The audience was captivated, nodding along as she built her case for a breakthrough in quantum entanglement theory. When she concluded to enthusiastic applause, Professor Whitaker rose for the traditional first question. Impressive work, Miss Cartwright. Your theoretical framework bears striking similarities to some emerging approaches in the field. Could you address how your work differs from these parallel efforts? It was a softball question, giving her an opportunity to distinguish her research. Miranda smiled confidently. While there may be surface similarities, my approach is fundamentally novel in how it addresses quantum decoherence through my modified entanglement equations. My modified equations. My approach. The familiar anger threatened to surface, but I pushed it down, waiting for my moment. As questions continued, I raised my hand. Professor Whitaker acknowledged me with a nod, his expression unreadable. Thank you for your presentation, Miss Cartwright, I began, standing so the entire audience could see me. I have a specific question about the field dispersion equation you presented on slide 23. Miranda's smile remained fixed, though a flicker of unease crossed her eyes. Of course. That equation appears identical to one developed in my own research 6 months ago, I continued calmly. As do several other key components of your methodology. A murmur swept through the audience. Miranda's smile tightened. Great minds often arrive at similar conclusions independently, she replied smoothly, especially when working in the same department. Indeed, I agreed. However, I find it curious that your equation contains the same unique variable notation that I created for my personal research notes. Notation that doesn't appear in any published literature. The murmur grew louder. I could see Professor Whitaker leaning forward, his brow furrowed. Furthermore, I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart, the data you presented from your quantum field experiments is identical to data downloaded from the lab computer during unauthorized hours last month, data from my experiments. That's absurd, Miranda snapped, her composure cracking. I conducted those experiments myself. Did you? I reached into my bag and withdrew a sealed envelope, handing it to Professor Whitaker. This contains security logs from the lab showing access using your ID during unauthorized hours, coinciding exactly with downloads of my research files. The room had grown completely silent. The only sound was the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the rustle of paper as Professor Whitaker examined the logs. There's more, I added, turning to address the audience directly. Miss Cartwright's thesis builds on stolen work, but more critically, it contains fundamental theoretical flaws that render its conclusions invalid. With that, I nodded to Dr. Hammond, who distributed copies of a paper to key faculty members and the journal editors. This paper, which I submitted to Quantum Physics Review last week, and which has undergone expedited peer review, demonstrates both the correct theoretical framework and the fatal flaws in the approach Miss Cartwright has presented today. The journal's editor-in-chief stood up, her silver hair catching the light. Miss Sullivan's paper has been accepted for publication in our next issue. The reviewers were unanimous in their assessment of its groundbreaking contribution to quantum entanglement theory. Chaos erupted in the hall. Miranda stood frozen at the podium, her face ashen. Professor Whitaker was examining both my paper and the security logs, his expression growing increasingly grave. Dr. Weber's theoretical foundations, the editor continued over the commotion, which Miss Sullivan has elegantly extended, represent a paradigm shift in our understanding of quantum mechanics. I caught Miranda's eye across the room. For a moment, just a moment, I glimpsed genuine fear in her expression, the same fear I had felt in my previous life when my career collapsed around me due to her theft. The department chair, Dr. Harrison, approached the podium. In light of these serious allegations, this presentation is suspended pending a full investigation. Miss Cartwright, Professor Whitaker, and Miss Sullivan, please remain after the symposium for an initial discussion with the Ethics Committee. Miranda finally moved, gathering her materials with shaking hands as whispers rippled through the audience. The sweet taste of vindication filled my mouth as I watched her retreat from the podium, her shoulders hunched in defeat. Dr. Hammond squeezed my arm gently. "Well done," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the continuing commotion. "Your uncle would be proud." I nodded, a complex mix of emotions, satisfaction, relief, and an unexpected touch of sadness washing over me. 5 years of careful planning had led to this moment, this public vindication. Yet watching Miranda's humiliation brought less pleasure than I had anticipated. As the symposium organizers struggled to restore order and proceed with the final presentation, I remained seated, my hands steady for the first time that day. The hardest part was over, but the full reckoning was yet to come. The Ethics Committee meeting lasted 3 hours. In a sterile conference room with harsh fluorescent lighting, Miranda's academic misconduct was methodically documented and examined. Security logs, comparative analyses of our research, and timestamped evidence of her unauthorized access to my data all painted a damning picture. Professor Whitaker looked decades older, the gravity of his failure to detect plagiarism within his own research group weighing heavily on him. When he spoke, his voice was hollow with disappointment. "I failed in my duty as an advisor," he admitted. "I should have recognized the patterns earlier." Miranda, meanwhile, had shifted from denial to desperate damage control. "This is all a misunderstanding," she insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. Our research naturally overlapped, and yes, perhaps I accessed the lab during unauthorized hours, but only because I was falling behind and needed more time. Dr. Harrison, chairing the ethics committee, regarded her coolly. "And the identical data sets? The unique notation? The systematic pattern of overlap that consistently shows your work following Miss Sullivan's by weeks or months?" Miranda had no answer for that. When the meeting finally concluded, the preliminary decision was clear. A full investigation would proceed. Miranda's thesis defense would be suspended, and she would be barred from lab access pending the outcome. And I emerged from the administration building into the cool evening air, emotionally exhausted but vindicated. The campus was quiet, most students having left for the day. The distant sound of the university bell tower chiming 8 o'clock echoed across the grounds. I had just reached the physics building to collect my belongings when a figure stepped out from behind a column. Alexander Chen, Miranda's boyfriend and a postdoctoral researcher in our department, blocked my path. "You've destroyed her," he said without preamble, his voice tight with anger. The smell of cigarettes clung to his expensive jacket as he loomed over me. "She destroyed herself," I replied evenly, my hand already in my pocket activating my phone's recorder. Academic integrity isn't optional. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Her entire career is ruined." "I'm well aware," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "Just as she ruined mine in—" I caught myself before mentioning my previous life. Alexander stepped closer, his face twisted with malice. "This isn't over. Everyone in academia knows how these whistleblowers end up. Ostracized, labeled as difficult. No one likes a snitch, even when they're right. Are you threatening me?" "I'm promising you," he hissed. "Miranda has friends in this field. Important friends. One published paper won't save you when everyone hears about your vindictive crusade to destroy a promising young scientist over what? Professional jealousy?" I laughed then, surprising both of us. "Is that what she told you? That I'm jealous of her?" His momentary confusion gave me the opening I needed to step around him. "Document everything," I advised, walking backward to maintain eye contact. "Every conversation, every email, every accusation." That's what I did, and look where we are now. I turned and continued toward the physics building, my heart pounding despite my outward calm. Behind me, I heard Alexander curse under his breath before his footsteps receded in the opposite direction. Inside the empty lab, I gathered my belongings, pausing to look around the space where I'd spent countless hours across 2 lifetimes. The familiar equipment hummed softly in the background, the scent of electronics and cleaning solution filling my nostrils. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Hammond. "Dinner tomorrow to discuss your postdoc options?" Several colleagues very interested after today. I smiled, typing back my acceptance. As I slipped my phone into my pocket, the lab door opened behind me. Miranda stood in the doorway, her makeup streaked from crying, her earlier poise completely shattered. "Why are you doing this to me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I set down my bag, turning to face her fully. "You know exactly why." "It was just research," she pleaded, stepping into the lab. "Everyone builds on others' work. That's how science progresses." "Building on published work with proper citation is how science progresses," I corrected her. "Stealing unpublished research from a colleague's private notes is plagiarism." She flinched at the word. One mistake shouldn't ruin my entire future. "It wasn't one mistake, though, was it? It was a systematic pattern of theft. Month after month, year after year." Miranda collapsed into a lab chair, burying her face in her hands. "What am I supposed to do now? Who would hire me with this on my record?" For a moment, looking at her broken figure, I felt a stab of empathy. In my previous life, I had asked myself these same questions after my academic reputation was destroyed. "You'll find something," I said, more gently than I'd intended. "Just not in academia." She looked up, hope flaring briefly in her tear-reddened eyes. "You could help me. Tell them it was a misunderstanding, that you overreacted." "No." The word came out firm and final. "I won't help you escape the consequences you earned." "You bitch," she whispered, her temporary vulnerability hardening into hatred. "Alexander was right about you. You've been planning this, waiting for the perfect moment to humiliate me publicly." "Would you have preferred I handle plagiarism privately?" I asked, gathering my bag. "That's not how academia works, as you well know." "This isn't over," she threatened, rising from the chair. I nodded tiredly. "That's exactly what Alexander said, but it is over, Miranda. The evidence is overwhelming, and no amount of social manipulation will change that." As I reached the door, she called after me, "You don't understand what you've started." I paused, looking back at her one last time. "No, you don't understand what you started. Actions have consequences. Sometimes they take years to manifest, but they always come due eventually." Outside, the night air felt cleansing after the charged confrontation. Stars glittered overhead as I walked across campus, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. For the first time since my inexplicable rebirth, I felt truly free of the past that had haunted me. Whatever consequences Miranda and Alexander might try to orchestrate, I was prepared. This time, I had documented everything. 1 year later, I stood on the stage of the International Quantum Physics Conference, the weight of the Breakthrough Innovation Medal heavy against my palm. The polished wood of the podium felt smooth beneath my fingertips as I looked out at the sea of faces, colleagues, mentors, and students who had gathered to celebrate advances in our field. "Thank you for this tremendous honor," I began, the microphone amplifying my voice throughout the grand hall. The scent of fresh flowers from the elaborate arrangements flanking the stage reminded me how far I'd come from the sterile lab where this journey had begun. 5 years ago, I embarked on a research direction that many considered unorthodox, building on the theoretical framework my uncle, Dr. Jonathan Weber, left unfinished at his death. In the front row, Dr. Hammond beamed with mentor's pride. Professor Whitaker sat beside her, his redemption found in supporting my work after acknowledging his failure to detect Miranda's plagiarism. The ethics investigation had concluded with the revocation of her degree and a formal censure for Professor Whitaker, a surprisingly lenient outcome that he'd accepted with humble relief. Today, our team's work on quantum entanglement has opened new possibilities not just for computing, but for secure communications, advanced materials, and even medical imaging, I continued, gesturing to the colleagues who had joined my expanding research group over the past year. As I delivered my acceptance speech, I caught a glimpse of Dr. Harrison nodding approvingly from the audience. The investigation he'd chaired had been thorough and fair, ultimately validating every aspect of my claims against Miranda while acknowledging the systematic failures that had allowed her plagiarism to go undetected for so long. After the ceremony, during the reception, Dr. Kapoor approached with a glass of champagne. "Congratulations again," she said, touching her glass to mine with a soft clink. "I've been meaning to ask. Have you heard anything about Miranda Cartwright recently?" I shook my head. Not directly. Last I heard, she had taken a position with a technology assessment firm in the private sector. In fact, I knew precisely where Miranda was. After the academic world had closed its doors to her, she'd found work at TechEvol Industries, a company that hired people with scientific backgrounds to evaluate technology investments for venture capital firms. No research, no publications, no teaching. Just analyzing other people's innovations for commercial potential. A waste of talent, Dr. Kapoor sighed, regardless of her ethical failings. Perhaps, I agreed, sipping my champagne, but choices have consequences. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from the Dean of Sciences at MIT confirming my guest lecture next month. The aftershocks of Miranda's exposure had tested my reputation briefly, with some colleagues viewing my methodical documentation of her plagiarism as calculating or vindictive. But as the evidence had mounted and my research continued to produce groundbreaking results, those whispers had faded. Later that evening, I found myself alone in the hotel balcony, watching the city lights shimmer below. The cool night breeze carried the faint scent of rain as I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here, and I still had no explanation for my rebirth, the inexplicable second chance that had allowed me to rewrite my destiny. Sometimes, I wondered if it had been merely an elaborate dream, my subconscious processing the trauma of academic betrayal. Other times, in quiet moments like this, I considered more fantastical possibilities. Quantum entanglement across timelines. Consciousness transferring between parallel universes. Whatever the explanation, I had seized the opportunity to ensure justice prevailed. Not through revenge, but through excellence and integrity. My phone buzzed again. A message from my graduate student Eliza, with a breakthrough on our latest experiment. I smiled, typing back encouragement and suggestions. Mentoring promising young scientists had become one of the unexpected joys of my new position as a rising star in the field. 3 months after the medal ceremony, I finalized the paperwork for the Weber Foundation for Scientific Integrity, a scholarship program named for my uncle that would support graduate students committed to ethical research practices. The smooth texture of my uncle's old fountain pen felt right in my hand as I signed the founding documents. A tangible connection to the family legacy I was extending in ways he could never have imagined. The Foundation's first initiative would be a workshop series on ethical research practices, addressing plagiarism, proper citation, data integrity, and the pressures that sometimes led young scientists astray. Not vindictive, but constructive, creating something positive from my own painful experiences across 2 lifetimes. 6 months after establishing the foundation, I was setting up an experiment in my new lab when a notification alerted me to a visitor. Through the glass walls, I recognized Alexander Chen waiting in the reception area, looking considerably less polished than when I'd last seen him. My administrative assistant appeared at my door. "Dr. Sullivan, there's a Mr. Chen here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." I hesitated, then nodded. "Give me 5 minutes to finish this setup, then send him in." As I calibrated the final measurements, I considered the potential reasons for Alexander's unexpected visit. Miranda and he had broken up shortly after her academic disgrace, another predictable casualty of her downfall. When he entered my lab, the first thing I noticed was his humbled demeanor. Gone was the arrogant postdoc who had threatened me in the shadows of the physics building. "Dr. Sullivan," he began formally, "thank you for seeing me." "What can I do for you, Alexander?" I asked, maintaining a professional distance between us. He shifted uncomfortably. "I've been offered a position that would involve collaboration with your research group. Before accepting, I wanted to clear the air between us." "I see," I said, leaning against my workbench. "And what air needs clearing?" "My behavior toward you was inexcusable," he said, meeting my eyes directly. "I threatened you out of misplaced loyalty to Miranda, without examining the evidence for myself." I studied him carefully, searching for signs of deception. "What changed your mind?" "Working with the ethics committee as part of my remedial service," he admitted. "I was assigned to help revise the department's plagiarism guidelines. Reviewing the evidence in Miranda's case was enlightening. The irony wasn't lost on me. And now you want my blessing to join a collaborative project with my team?" "Not your blessing," he clarified. "Just your assurance that my past mistake won't prejudice our professional interactions moving forward. I considered his request carefully. In my previous life, bitterness and resentment had consumed me after my academic destruction. In this life, I had achieved justice through methodical preparation and excellent work. Holding on to personal grudges served no purpose now. Your past actions will not affect our professional relationship, I finally said. But I expect absolute integrity in all your work, especially anything associated with my team. Relief washed over his features. Thank you. You won't have any concerns on that front. After he left, I returned to my experiment, thoughts drifting to the strange poetry of life's circular patterns. Alexander, once Miranda's defender, now seeking redemption through proper academic conduct. Professor Whitaker, once her champion, now a humbled but wiser mentor to other students. And Miranda herself, I'd heard through department gossip that she'd recently been passed over for promotion at Techival, her supervisors citing trust issues stemming from her academic history. That evening, I worked late in my lab, adding final touches to a grant proposal for extending our quantum entanglement research into medical applications. Through the large windows, I could see the campus lit up against the night sky, a landscape of possibilities stretching before me. On my desk sat a framed copy of my breakthrough paper, the one that had simultaneously vindicated me and exposed Miranda's plagiarism. Beside it was a photograph of my uncle in his lab decades earlier, his excited smile mirroring my own passion for discovery. As I gathered my things to leave, I caught my reflection in the darkened window, confident, accomplished, at peace. In my first life, Miranda's betrayal had destroyed me because I'd been unprepared and trusting. In this second chance, foreknowledge had been my power, allowing me to document, prepare, and ultimately prevail. The quiet satisfaction I felt wasn't about Miranda's downfall, but about the restoration of what should have been. My work recognized, my uncle's theoretical legacy extended, and my future secure. Justice, not revenge. Outside, the night air carried the promise of spring as I walked to my car. Whatever mysterious force had granted me this second chance, I had used it not just to avoid my previous fate, but to create something better for myself and for the scientific community I served. The quantum entanglement theory that had once been stolen from me now formed the foundation of an expanding research program that might ultimately benefit millions. The Weber Foundation would help ensure that future scientists could pursue their work in an environment that valued both innovation and integrity. As I drove home beneath a canopy of stars, I felt a profound sense of closure. The betrayal that had once defined my existence had been transformed into merely one chapter in a much longer, more meaningful story. This time, I had written my own ending.
You cannot find this content outside of my bathroom. And stop trying. Stop it. These are some acrylic gouache pieces that I have been painting. Monsters, baddies, and succubi. Oh my. If you're a degen, give the next stream a try. I like that, Val. Was that tone okay? Was that kind of what you were looking for? Monsters, baddies, and succubi. Oh my. If you're a degen, give the next stream a try. It was great. Okay. What, Minimal? Can you paint me like one of your French girls? Pretty. Thank you. Haters will try and make their own sacks of hair cream. Seth has been working on it, actually. He's been hard at work. Minimal.
I obey the bird. I give little tippies.
Minimal. That was more than a little tippy. That was more than just the tip. Minimal, thank you. Guess what? I guess you showed me what. Thank you. Oh, bloody hell. Minimal, thank you. I'm so dehydrated. Seth's been working really hard. Minimal showed more than the tip. I know. Minimal, that's incredibly kind of you. Thank you. I'm painting Joshua Tree. I'm painting a Joshua Tree in Joshua Tree. You know Joshua Tree from Joshua Tree? That's what I'm painting. This is freaking beautiful. Next. It's fucking incredible. Oh, God, it won't let me. Oh, my God. Really did a big zoom. This is so freaking gorgeous. Are you working through the whole tarot deck? This is so gorgeous. Been eating extra pineapple for scent. That truly makes like